And I'm going to turn it over to Norm to introduce you to our two wonderful presenters tonight.
Thank you for joining us tonight. I attended the Legislative Interim Water and Natural Resources Committee held in Artesia by Zoom or by webcast, October 29th, I think it was. And I heard Representative Rubio and Representative Cadena speak with great passion about Project Jupiter. And that was the impetus for inviting them to participate in tonight's workshop on Project Jupiter. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Rubio, ask that she say a few words about who she is, and then tell us what she thinks about Project Jupiter. Representative?
Thanks, Norm. And you had called me senator earlier, but I was gonna make a joke about I would never be a senator, ever, ever. Thank you everyone for being here tonight on a Thursday night. I know that you could be probably doing something a lot more fun than this, but I really appreciate you all taking the time to be here and to just better understand some of the concerns that I have regarding this project. And I think I just want to sort of ground us in why this issue was so important to me, because it's not necessarily just about Project Jupiter, but it's really about the pattern that New Mexico keeps falling into and has been falling into for almost a century. And for New Mexicans, there has been this long history of being told that the next big thing is what's going to save us, whether it has been spaceport, whether it was Virgin Galactic, Facebook, film incentives pitched as these permanent engines, or the hydrogen hubs that we were debating just a few years ago here in the legislature. And now it's Project Jupiter. And I think one of the things that's just really important, and just to give some backstory, is I was born and raised in the southeastern part of the state. I was born in Roswell, grew up in Lake Arthur, and so extractive industries has been a part of my life for my whole life. And I understand the complexities and the nuances that come with these industries when it impacts the environment, but also how it impacts people. And one of the things that I've heard, whether it's from oil and gas, or now with Project Jupiter, is that this is the future, and if we don't jump now, we'll be left behind. And each and every one of these moments that we're forced to commit public resources up front, while many of these corporations take the upside, and the downside is a community problem that we have to deal with later on, as the years progress. And so yesterday I was actually reading NPR, an article about where billionaires like Thiel and SoftBank are starting to liquidate their AI positions because they're worried about a speculative bubble and how it's going to sort of bust we're sort of in this bubble right now that's about to bust. And I'm sharing that because it should matter for public policy, not because AI is bad, because that's a debate we should be having about AI specifically, and I am open to having that debate, but because when the industry itself is signaling instability, like I've been reading, it's reckless for public institutions to lock themselves into these long-term subsidies, these abatements, and these water commitments. New Mexico took this gamble at the exact moment the market is now wobbling, and that's not innovation. That's wishful thinking with public dollars. And what's wild to me is that oil and gas, for all its destructive impact, at least has a century-long history of its boom and bust cycles. We know what that damage looks like. We know the cost to land and to people, and we know how extraction shapes a state. AI is extraction too. It's extraction of the land, it's extraction of the water, power, labor, public trust, but it's now in a new costume. And because it's dressed up in this form of innovation, it makes the old extractive industries like oil and gas look almost predictable. And that should terrify us, not comfort us. Project Jupiter wasn't just a policy disagreement. And I think Representative Cadena will speak more to how we got here because of that, of those issues as far back as January when we were up in Santa Fe during the 60-day session. What Project Jupiter highlighted to all of us was that it was a process failure. It was a transparency failure. It was a democracy failure. Community was sidelined. Information was withheld, and decisions were made before questions were even allowed. We didn't just get sold the hype because it's been a lot of hype. We were forced to subsidize it as well. And I just want to remind us all that this isn't about one county commission vote. Yes, the county commission here in Doña Ana County did this vote, but this wasn't just about one county commission. It's about our state here in New Mexico that still doesn't believe that its own people are worth investing in. So it keeps looking for a savior. It's the same logic colonizers used. You don't know your value, so let us extract it and tell you it's a gift. New Mexico has everything it needs to build a future that isn't dependent on industries that will abandon us the moment the stock market stutters. And we know, and we've seen it, we're seeing it right now that it is. We need investment in people, not in promises. And we need public institutions that don't chase hype cycles. We need economic development that honors the land, that honors labor, and that honors water, not industries that treat them as disposable inputs. And again, if AI wants to be a part of that future, it has to meet our terms, not the other way around. And I feel like that is the baseline that we have to have here in the state of New Mexico. And this is something that we must demand from our leaders, that we can't just be selling our souls to these industries who don't care about our communities, much less our environment and our natural resources. And so I urge you all that as we head into session in a couple months, as we start debating bills around water, me and Representative Cadena serve in the Ag and Water and Acequias Committee. There will be bills likely that will come through our committee. There will be bills that will come through the Energy Committee. I really want you all to stay vigilant about all of this, because I know that Project Jupiter felt like it happened really quickly, but I want you all to realize that it didn't. Like, we knew something was going on in January. We just didn't know exactly what that was. But it was part of a long-term plan. And so I want you all to just stay vigilant about that, and just to remember that this is part of a really an unfortunate cycle that this state has gone through for decades. And I still believe that we can change course, not just with Project Jupiter, but with how we look for sustainable sources of economic development. And so I urge you all to please consider that possibility as we move forward in the next year. So thank you.
Representative Rubio, sorry that I gave you the wrong title.
It's
you
okay, I
talked
forgive
in
you.
Artesia about the pollution loads and the effect on your constituents. Would you go over that?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
You talked in Artesia about the air pollution and what that would do to your constituents. Do you have anything to say about that?
Of air pollution just in general or
Air
specific to?
pollution from the gas turbines at Project Jupiter.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that we're not quite sure exactly what that's going to look like in the future. I think what we discussed during the interim committee this past when we were in Artesia is the fact that we already are dealing with pollution from industry, but also from a variety of different things. And this, because we don't actually know what that's going to look like through this project, all we can say is that it's going to expand what we're already experiencing here in southern New Mexico.
Thank you very much. Representative Cadena, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, hello everyone. I'm Micaela Lara Cadena, and I'm honored to be the state representative in New Mexico's House District 33 here in Doña Ana County. I gotta say, I'm feeling a lot today, and to follow my dear friend and colleague Rep Rubio, I'm in all my emotions now. Today I got to have a long lunch with somebody who, for probably a decade now, I've known of mostly in name, but whose like such depth of insight and expertise I really got to see myself like up close and personal over the last couple of months. And we like slipped into a pretty personal conversation about what it means to be in public office, what it means to take votes, what it means to be in a life that requires accountability and conversation to constituents every single day. And I'm really proud that I've got to be in this body with Angelica in particular. And often, so many times, Angelica is serving, I think, in her 5th term year. I'm in my 4th. To be in Santa Fe can feel so damn isolating. It can feel threatening. It can feel unsafe. It can feel too often like you're standing alone and being gaslit. So while I've had so much respect for this dear friend Rubio, I call her Rubio, for a long time, and we've got to show up together for moments, many moments over the last several years, it's meant everything to me that we could come with such clarity to the fallout that has been Project Jupiter. And one of the things I've shared in public spaces, and including when our county commission took this big vote, oh, we have all sorts of people joining us today. When our county commission took this big vote in September, I think we have a county commissioner on, or at least his wife, maybe Commissioner Sanchez, and his wife, school board member Teresa Tenorio. I see Vanessa Allery just joined, the big lobbyist for
It's just
Borderplex.
me. It's just
And
me.
the Borderplex lobbyist in Project Jupiter. So, right, these are the conversations we've all been deserving, like real direct conversations about what this project is and how it lands on the communities that we call home. So I'm gonna take us back a little bit. I think people deserve to know about the lead up to what happened at our county commission. And like Rubio shared, projects like this are years in the works. Ourselves, our constituents, we heard about this really in the light with less than 30 days before the county commission took this vote. But legislators and lobbyists and investors had been developing this for a long time. Looking back now, like Rubio shared, myself, Rubio, our chair on Ag and Water, Christina Ortez, we knew something was up. We knew that this group of players were circling around something. Frankly, we cried about it in the basement, outside the House floor, because in different ways, we were feeling like there was something happening that we couldn't quite get our finger on, but just the people in the room and the sort of whispering conversations and side doors slamming shut was clear that some folks were up to something. Admittedly, when I came home out of that 60-day session, it was out of sight, out of mind. I didn't engage again until the incredible leadership of Empowerment Congress at the time showed up at a legislative finance committee meeting protesting. I'd heard about the protest. I'd been at another committee hearing. I went to LFC the very next day. They happened to be meeting in Cruces, so I could listen in, learn myself, and hear what the hell they were talking about with this. That is how truly I, as a state legislator, came to know about this project. But pretty quickly, as I started to look backwards, I realized that we, as the legislature, had created a significant mechanism for this project to come to be. And to tell that story, I already see in the chat, people are asking about House Bill 93. I've checked in myself with Chair Ortez, the original sponsor of House Bill 93. Rep Rubio was there as our witness, and she's someone that I've trusted and respected for a long time. And for those of you that don't know her, she's an incredible representative in northern New Mexico in Taos, and she comes from Conservancy. She was even the director of the Taos Land Trust, if that's what it's called back in the day. So she comes with a lot of cred and comes from a lifetime of doing environmental and conservation work. So she had been working with some of the big New Mexico enviro groups on something called advanced grid technology. That bill had nothing to do with data centers, AI, microgrids. It just didn't. It was something they'd been working on for years to just modernize how we move power in New Mexico. So when I realized what's going on and have a chance to see Rep Ortez in person, truly, I walked up to her and I said, "Did you know?" We all knew what was on the table here. And she said quickly and with honesty that she had no idea what was happening when a group of legislators decided to amend House Bill 93 with something about microgrids. And procedurally, how I think most of you all know, you have a pretty engaged audience here, Norm and Brittany. Most of you know how a bill becomes a law, but in a 60-day session, any legislator can introduce a bill, whether it's a fiscal bill concerning how we raise revenue or spend it, or whether it's a policy bill. So this happened to be a House bill. That means that Rep Ortez typically would have moved that bill through 2 committees, which she did, and then gotten that bill through the House floor for a vote of our full chamber. Advanced grid passes out of the House, it goes to the Senate. Right? This is like movidas on top of movidas, but what is allowed procedurally is that any committee or either chamber can amend a piece of legislation. What happened here that created such a massive opening for Project Jupiter is that Senator Padilla brought a Senate floor amendment. So this bill had gone through Senate committees already. While it was on the Senate floor for the last legislative vote before it would go upstairs for a governor's signature, Senator Padilla brought a floor amendment that introduced and defined what was a qualified microgrid. What's interesting to me as we look closer at that language, when we in regular communication talk about something being micro, it implies that it's small, right? Whether it's macro economics or a micro poodle, right? Micro is supposed to mean something that is small. And what this microgrid amendment did was say, with no cap, it said that if someone wanted to produce their own power for their own use, and they could produce at least, not a cap, but at least 20 megawatts of power, that they could establish themselves without being under the jurisdiction of the Public Regulation Commission, really like our state's mechanism for regulating utilities and otherwise most power that's produced and either consumed or exported in New Mexico. So as it's been explained to me, there are senators that had no idea this was going on. Nobody mentioned that this was about AI, that this was about data centers, that Project Jupiter was in the work. None of that happened. In fact, both Senator Steinborn and Senator Souls have said publicly that had these legislators been honest, about what the implications of this amendment were, that they would have vigorously debated this amendment on the Senate floor. As somebody in my fourth term, I can say with some certainty that had they told the truth about the purpose of their amendment, that would have blown up on the Senate floor. Maybe they could have argued in very compelling ways and gotten the votes anyway, but Senator Padilla did not disclose in any transparent way what the purpose of his amendment actually was. When I've asked Chair Ortiz how this was explained to her, because as someone already said in the chat, right, if the other chamber amends our bill, whether it's in committee or on the floor, eventually that has to come back to the original chamber for a concurrence vote. Rep Ortiz has clarified to me, and again, Rep Rubio was there as part of our in-person conversation, that while there were negotiations about the Senate floor amendment, she was not present for them. In fact, she was busy in a 3-hour debate on the Senator Stewart community benefits bill that was causing some controversy on the House floor. But as she's explained it, the negotiations were happening when she was on the floor moving a bill for 3 hours, could not walk away. But those negotiations that several people have confirmed with me happened in Chair Nathan Small's office. So Senator Padilla is the floor sponsor, Chair Small is his sidekick. He invites the environmental advocates that had been working on advanced grid to come meet in his office so they could tell them what they wanted on the Senate floor amendment. As it's been explained to me, I talked about this in some legislative interim committees this summer, the sense I got was these enviros were told, you come, you don't fight us putting this on your bill, or your bill doesn't pass. I have some questions. Clearly, I wasn't in the room. As it's been explained to me by some people that were, everybody there knew that day that this was about Project Jupiter. And Chair Small, in fact, was telling them, if you want your bill to go upstairs and get signed, you let us do this anyway, and went as far to say, and you don't oppose us when we come out with this. For those of you that call our Mesilla Valley home or Southern New Mexico is where you show up, you can see that. Those big New Mexico environmental groups did not come and get in this fight with us because they'd already made a deal with Chair Small to stay out. I wish that we could say like we have different expectations of how politics and policy works in New Mexico, but often this is the dirty deal. Some legislators with power, in this case Chair Small, immense power, said, we'll let your advanced grid stand, we'll send it upstairs, the governor will sign it into law. But we're putting our agenda on it. As you all know, of course, Project Jupiter was very much supported by the New Mexico governor and her administration. So they made it clear this is what they wanted. They found an avenue to get it done. Really important to this story is when people came out of that negotiation, they told Ortiz that their microgrid amendment was about community schools, community hospitals, community resiliency. And thinking about the district she represents, right, in far north New Mexico with extreme weather getting more extreme, she was thinking about what it could mean for a hospital to have an actual micro way of producing energy that could keep patients alive through a terrible blizzard, or what it would mean one day to think that a school, maybe a charter school or a Montessori school, could invest over the long run in a way of producing, storing their own energy and use that on site, right? Like that is how it was explained to her, and that is why she was agreed. And what Chair Ortiz has shared with me is if she'd known what this amendment was really about, she would have in fact asked that the House fail to concur with the Senate floor amendment and had this bill die. What she said is as much goodness as was in House Bill 93, it was not worth selling out our communities here in the borderlands. So that had anyone been honest with her, it wouldn't have gone this way. But they lied to her. All that to say, and I feel like already I'm talking a long time, I feel a lot of people have already heard me tell these stories. I feel accountability in part to some of the ways we went down because I was inadvertently, without knowing, some of the conversations that the same legislators and lobbyists were having about advancing this project. Nobody ever told me what this bill I introduced was part of, but it was a bill that I introduced about real-time water monitoring. And when someone first brought me this idea, Jennifer Bradfute, who, as we all know, is a big player in the Jupiter landscape, brought me this bill. She was talking about what it meant for communities to have real-time information about the water they used in their lives. And for me, Rubio, like, that's something we know to be true. Clean water, whether it's for your drinking purposes or your what you wash your little ones in, or how you care for your livestock, like, that's a human right. And what we've seen down south, and especially with CRUA as of late, that's not an expectation that all of our communities can rely on. So when I was approached about trying to figure out how we might use state dollars so that local governments could know what was in their water, I was down. The way the proposal was brought to me was a little sketchy, admittedly. And when I heard about some of the players, I was a little thrown off. And I said, but I can imagine how we turn this bill into something that is in the public interest. It's in the public good. So I took that idea and said something I would be comfortable with was adding real-time water technology to a list of what the Water Trust Board could send money to local governments to use on. And that's institutionally been around forever. It's well vetted. It has water experts, and they decide collectively how to prioritize New Mexico projects that our communities need. So it turns out we negotiated, figured out this bill in a way that could be in the public good, and then we moved the bill. But through the process, there was just some things that I started to flag. I was able to share those with Rep. Rubio, Chair Ortez. We got to have these really immediate conversations because we started to realize things are going on, and including that lobbyists had given direction to a drafter to do something that I had explicitly said not to do. At one point, and I've lost lots of sleep over this, I remember being in my office working to prepare this bill, and Vanessa, who's in our Zoom with us tonight, one of the lobbyists, the lead lobbyist, it sounds like, for Borderplex, turned to me and said, Rep, are we going to see you later then for the press conference? And I'm kicking myself for not going to the damn press conference. And I said, what do you mean? And Jennifer Bradfute shot her a look and said, oh, she doesn't need to be there. It turns out Vanessa didn't lie, right? She didn't know that I had been left in the dark and was talking about clean water for communities. She had inadvertently tried to invite me upstairs to what sounds like was the press conference the governor did with Borderplex about some project. To be real, nobody was talking about the scale, size, magnitude of Jupiter at the time. Nothing like this was disclosed until late August. But they had, I guess, to their credit, told some people in Santa Fe that they were up to something on the Borderplex. Vanessa inadvertently invited me. Turns out that Jennifer told her, not this one, she doesn't need to go there. And I happened to not get along with the governor. I was like, I'm not going to the governor's press conference. I wish that I had understood differently that the legislation I was moving was part of something bigger. Months later, truly in September, someone emailed me a presentation that these folks in Borderplex had put together during the session, talking about 3 bills that they wanted to pass in advance of their project. It was called, I think, a different planet at the time. It wasn't Jupiter, Project Neptune maybe. And sure enough, it was the bill I was doing around real-time monitoring. It was Michael Badia, who had a standalone bill on microgrids. And it was Chair Small, who had a bill on creating an entity that could sell water as part of an economic development tool. Apparently, those 2 were in the works. I imagine they found me because I do care about water and have an important position on the water committee, and I'm a trusted resource when it comes to talking and moving policy like this. So turns out I was part of a convo that never was. By the end, me, Rep. Rubio, Ortez, we knew some shady shit was going down. And in those final days, because I couldn't quite pinpoint what was happening, and I didn't know yet what Borderplex and Jupiter were up to, I pulled that bill from consideration off the Senate floor. So none of their bills became law. that is why it looks like to me, like when Padilla's microgrid bill didn't move, they had to pull something and put it on a Senate floor amendment that didn't address this or would not have created this possibility. That's what happened. So when we get here, fast forward many months, I hear about these protests, I go listen, I start paying attention quickly, I ask lots of people to meet for coffees, for dinners, like catch me up, I need to show up, and I think I know some backstory to this, right? People didn't really understand where the microgrid was coming for, so we were able to connect the dots and pull up that it actually was this House Bill 93 floor amendment. But important to those learnings for us, like Representative Rubio alluded to, a county commission took a vote in a hurry. As a constituent, as someone that was raised in this county and get to raise my kids here today, I am deeply disappointed in that vote. It stuns me that people we elect to office would look at an incomplete application, truly with like draft watermarks on it, typos, missing information, and take a vote, right? So that's me as someone in Doña Ana. But as a policymaker, when I look at the context of that process, I couldn't be more angry. Our constituents every day deserve transparency. They deserve to know what our government is up to. They deserve to debate and ask questions and have answers and understand how massive decisions like this are going to shape our shared futures. And for this one, and I'll wrap so we can get to Norm's technical presentation and then hopefully answer lots of questions. On this one, yes, I'm honored to serve with Rep. Rubio on the House Ag and Water Committee, but I'm also the vice chair of the House Tax and Rev Committee and have been for a couple of terms. So for me, like my throwing down for justice is often in knowing what taxes are and how they land differently on different people, different families, different communities. So from the onset, when I heard that this was an IRB being considered for $165 billion, I was stunned. I think many of you all know by now, that was the largest IRB ever considered in the United States, not just New Mexico, like across the country. And when I realized or first heard that the payment in lieu of taxes was going to be $300 million, I assumed that was annually for a 30-year term. Because on an amount that big, to see that our county commission signs a deal to receive so little, like I was just stunned. And I have asked since August for somebody to raise their hand and tell me they made that deal, to tell me that they were part of the negotiations. But in fact, I've heard that Chair Small held negotiations. We've heard, as reported by her spouse, that Rep. Silva was apparently part of negotiations. County commissioners have wiped their hands and said, we weren't there. We didn't make the negotiations. But maybe Chair Small and Rep. Silva? Negotiating on behalf of who? We're not elected, us as state legislators, to do the bidding of the county. You all are probably aware, I imagine you're a pretty intelligent audience. What's implicated in IRBs, we often talk about property taxes, and the direct recipients of property taxes are county governments and local school districts. I've asked our superintendents, frankly, it would have been their job had they been offered a seat at the table to show up at negotiations. Nobody invited the Gaston superintendent or the Las Cruces Public Schools superintendent to negotiations. Nobody asked them what their funding gaps were, or what our student needs were, or what they might see as an appropriate payment in lieu of taxes on an amount of money that big. My example, 20 years old, Norm, is that when the IRB on Intel came to be in Rio Rancho, they got a new high school, a whole high school built for Rio Rancho, and an IRB that was worth maybe $15–20 billion, right? Our school district here where I represent in Las Cruces Public Schools was told they were getting $2 million for CTE. And that was said as if it was some kind of accomplishment or something they should be deeply appreciative for. Not speaking on behalf of them, but they were not invited to negotiate on this. So again, if it wasn't our commissioners and it wasn't our superintendent, I don't know, I've not asked any school board members about it. Like, who actually made this deal? So we all know about the property tax side of it. We're here to talk about water. I'll just quickly say, The other big piece is gross receipts tax, because when entities enter into an IRB arrangement, that's what it's for, the tax breaks. So the county holds in title for the term of those IRBs, all of it, the infrastructure, the roads, the buildings. In a project like this, clearly they can't build buildings worth $165 billion if the value is in the purchase of the real equipment and materials they're buying. So there's even GRT implications on that side. So I'll just wrap with saying it was shocking to me, and in Artesia, I finally got to ask some questions of our state economic development guy, Mark Roper. Nobody ever presented the value of the tax breaks that we were giving away. Instead, they said, you should pat your commissioners on the back because they got 300 million out of 165 billion. Nobody ever said that this is how many billions and billions and billions the tax break is worth, and put that little tiny 300 million next to that. So I am looking forward to the questions. I'm sure there's lots I forgot. I'm sure that many of you have heard me tell parts of these stories in person or in committee. I'm looking forward to Norm's technical presentation, and then very much we'll be ready to jump into the conversation. Thank you, Norm.
Thank you, Representative. That was great. And well, let me share my slides and then we will begin. So I have a job in this workshop that's a little more boring than what you've just heard. It's the technical details. I'm an engineer, a water engineer. I'm currently president of the New Mexico Water Advocates. And I just wanted to briefly say that I have 2 engineering degrees from New Mexico State University, which are part of the qualifications behind my presentation. I have a bachelor's in electrical and a master's in civil engineering and water. And the last time I was an employee, I was director of the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. So I want to talk about the climate and the hydrologic setting for Project Jupiter before I make some project comparisons that you may find informative. I hope you do. First, with regard to the climate, the cover of an excellent report entitled Climate Change in New Mexico over the next 50 years, Impacts on Water Resources, is part of the 50-year water plan for the state of New Mexico. And this graphic tells a story. This graphic is from the leap ahead analysis. You can find the report by Googling leap ahead analysis. It was prepared by experts who volunteered their time because there wasn't state money to pay for their time. They volunteered their time to prepare this report. So the arrows that you see here are million acre feet of water. And what it boils down to, these are the statewide lumped estimates of this group of scientists that are the authors of this report, eminently qualified. What they have concluded here is that we only get about 3.3% of the precipitation as useful water in New Mexico, water that we can use. A little less than half of that runs off to become all of our surface water. A little more than half of that 3.3% seeps in, going past the soil layer, which has plant roots in it, to recharge our aquifers. 96.7% of the water that falls on New Mexico, the precipitation, goes up into the air, is evapotranspiration. And here's the point from this slide. What happens when if due to temperature, transpiration, which is what plants use to survive, including the creosote bushes, which have a heck of a network of roots under them, and direct evaporation from the soil. What happens if those increase 1%, so that 96.7% becomes 97.7%? Well, that means that these terms go down by about a third. So 1 degree 1%, I'm sorry, of increased evapotranspiration reduces our usable water in New Mexico by a very significant amount. The slide's also from that report. We know that temperature is significantly increasing. There is no statistical trend in precipitation, but as temperature rises, the atmosphere's thirst for water goes up exponentially. And so a little bit of temperature increase really increases the evaporation potential for the water that falls on New Mexico soils. These three graphics are also from the leap ahead analysis. The one on the left shows New Mexico's projected temperatures, average temperatures, the increase in temperatures from 2040 to 2069. And it's about 6 degrees in Farmington, Fahrenheit, and about 5.3 degrees Fahrenheit down here in Las Cruces. In the upper right graph, there's a little orange line that shows the increasing temperatures. And the orangish band shows how temperature will increase under high emission scenarios. The green band shows how temperature might increase under low emission scenarios. And the United States has clearly moved into the high emissions scenario, whether or not we have Project Jupiter. The graph in the lower right shows the difference between the high, medium, and low emission scenarios translated to the flow of the Rio Grande entering the Middle Valley, entering the Middle Rio Grande. And that is the share for both the Middle Rio Grande and the Lower Rio Grande. If you look at the right end of that slide, you can see that by the time you get out a few years, there is a huge difference between the high emissions scenario and the low emissions scenario. So that's basically the climate setting that we're in. Now I want to talk a little bit about the legal system and hydrology. So the Rio Grande Compact is a big player in all of this. For those of you who don't know its history, El Paso in the late 1800s was getting all of its water from the Rio Grande, and then it went dry. And the reason was that Colorado had built canals that could divert essentially the whole flow of the river into the canals in the San Luis Valley. There was a lot of controversy for the next 2 decades. A moratorium was declared on all water development in the Rio Grande Basin in 1929. And then the Rio Grande Compact, which divided the flow of the river, high flow or low flow, it's applicable all the time. The compact was signed in 1938 in Santa Fe. And what this graphic shows are the 3 allocations that the Rio Grande Compact makes for use within New Mexico. The first is above the Otoe gauge, below the state line, and below the Otoe gauge, which is on the bridge to Los Alamos. The middle Rio Grande is the area between the Otoe gauge and Elephant Butte Dam. And then the third allocation originally made by the compact was for all water uses downstream of Elephant Butte Dam. The compact divides the water. You see a picture of the Otoe gauge. There's actually just a little box under the title there, and the pedestrian bridge right next to the highway bridge. Again, the highway to Los Alamos. But the compact was designed to fill up Elephant Butte Reservoir on high flows, whether they occurred in New Mexico or upstream in Colorado. And the compact says that the lower Rio Grande, that's all the lower Rio Grande, New Mexico, Texas, and the Mexican apportionment, get the bigger share of the flow of the water that comes past Otoe. The middle Rio Grande gets 43%, but that's capped. So all of the remaining water in high flow years can flow to Elephant Butte. The lower Rio Grande gets 57%, and And then everything else, once the flows get to a little over 1 million acre-feet a year, about 1.2 million. But guess what? The Rio Grande flows are diminishing. I looked at the last 50 years, and if you add 2025 to the last 50 years, you get 51 years, divide that by 3. So I looked at statistics in the first 30 years, the first third of the last 50 years, the middle third, and the most recent third. So in the first third, the average flow at the Ottawa gauge was 1.2 million acre-feet, and that's plenty to fill up Elephant Butte Reservoir in high flow years. In the most recent years, the average flow is 814,000 acre-feet, and this year's total flow will bring that down. So from the first third of the last 50 years to the most recent third, on average, within those periods, we've lost a third of our water supply, a third. Now, in the first 30 years, 10 of the 17 years were above 1 million acre-feet. In the most recent third, 4 of 17 years have yielded more than an acre-feet flow of the Rio Grande at the Ottawa gauge. So Elephant Butte was designed to be filled up on high flow years, but those high flow years are few and far between. And a worse problem is that New Mexico is having trouble meeting its compact deliveries into Elephant Butte Reservoir. This photo is not in the public domain. It's copyrighted, but I have permission to use it. It shows Elephant Butte Reservoir 3 years ago in August. And I understand the water level is lower now than it is in this photograph. I took this picture myself this last August. You see the once drowned foundations of resorts that existed at the Butte before the dam was built, and the marina in the background, and you can see the bathtub rings, which indicate how far the reservoir has fallen. It's 3% full. Now I'm going to compare, with that background, I'm going to compare these projects. Project Jupiter in Santa Teresa, a metadata center that has been in use in Los Lunas, New Mexico for about 10 years, I think, and then a new Meta AI data center that is planned for Northeast El Paso. And the comparison between these three is interesting. Project Jupiter, which has a private off-grid, and they call it a microgrid, but it's a gigagrid. It's huge. They're going to operate it, and it looks like, as Representative Cadena explained, without much regulation. Los Lunas gets its power from the Public Service Company of New Mexico, a utility, but PNM is now getting 75% of its power from renewables. The metadata center in El Paso is planned to be served, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, is planned to be served by El Paso Electric. They actually have an agreement with El Paso Electric now, and they're going to get their water from El Paso Utilities, but that is actually something for later in this presentation. Let's look at cooling and water. Project Jupiter apparently is going to use state-of-the-art dry cooling, which is kind of like the radiator in your car. You know, you don't have an evaporative cooler that's cooling your engine as you drive down the streets and the freeways. The radiator cools it off, but it's cooled off by running a fan that takes a lot of horsepower that pulls air through the radiator. So all of the heat in Project Jupiter, apparently, because there's few details that have been published, is going to be dry cooling. And that means the supply is not huge. But any additional demand in the Lower Rio Grande, given the compact situation, is grim. Los Lunas data center is much smaller. It uses the technologies that were available when it started construction, which are evaporative. The data center, Meta's planned data center in El Paso, is also going to be dry cooling, I think. And they say they will use hardly any water most of the year. Let's look at the water suppliers context. The Camino Real regional water utility, and I think I got that, I think I may have gotten the initials wrong. Regional Water Utility Authority, that's right, is a failed utility. It's under compliance orders from the New Mexico Environment Department. It has served its customers water that doesn't meet arsenic standards without notifying them, and it's had poor reliability. The Meta data center in Los Lunas gets its water from the village of Los Lunas. It has greater redundancy. And in El Paso, for the Meta data center, the El Paso Water Utilities is going to provide all of that water under a publicly approved agreement. Much better. Let's look at emissions. Project Jupiter is essentially a new fossil fuel power plant with a data center attached. They're using the simplest and least efficient generators. I think it's likely because those are the ones that can be obtained more quickly, that have the highest carbon dioxide emissions per megawatt hour of generation of any other technology. In Los Lunas, Los Lunas is supplied off the grid. There are massive solar fields and big transmission lines from those solar fields, big substations that lead directly into the Los Lunas data center. So a ton of its energy, or I think, is from renewables. And then El Paso will not have any on-site generation, and the emissions will be that of El Paso Electric's average grid emissions. Looking at tax breaks. Why did Project Jupiter get such a rich tax break while creating enormous environmental risks? 95% tax abatement for Project Jupiter, with power coming from a super inefficient fossil fuel plant. And I understand that that fossil fuel plant, based on articles that I've read from Midland, Texas, the Midland Reporter and other sources, there's likely to be a new natural gas pipeline constructed from the Permian to meet this demand. There isn't enough pipeline capacity, from what I've read, to bring the natural gas down from the San Juan Basin in northwest New Mexico. So it'll come from the Permian. And that Permian gas, there's going to be other competitors for it. The Meta plant in El Paso, the tax abatement's only 80%. That's still big, but there's a huge difference. And then, as I said before, the fossil fuel, the emissions will be whatever is typical for El Paso Electric in their fuel mix. So Project Jupiter, $165 billion with a $360 million payment in lieu of taxes for 750 jobs. The Los Lunas Metadata Center is much smaller IRBs, and it provides about 400 jobs. And the El Paso Meta facility that's in planning, I believe that they've said it will create about 100 jobs. So the key conclusion is that Project Jupiter is categorically different. new fossil fuel generation with the least efficient technology to generate that power, high emissions, weak water source, largest tax abatement, and the highest long-term public risk. I apologize for the small legends on this graph. I will read them to you. But it's a Project Jupiter versus basin-wide emissions comparison for the Paseo del Norte airshed. And from what I can tell from my research, the carbon dioxide emissions from Project Jupiter are going to be about half of what's existing in terms of million tons of carbon dioxide per year. Project Jupiter will be over 2.5 million tons of carbon dioxide per year per my calculations, and the total basin is about 5. And then the other big pollutant is nitrous oxides, which are a precursor to ozone. And the El Paso metropolitan area, including southern Doña Ana County, are already a non-attainment area for ozone. So we can expect this plant to dramatically increase the ozone concentrations, which are terrible for people's health. So I'm back to this graph that I started with to explain everything. We're in trouble with regard to temperature. Carbon dioxide emissions are making our water go away. Yet we have welcomed this inefficient new AI data center who's thumbing their nose at the social values of New Mexico to increase pollution, increase temperatures, use our water, and leave us holding the bag. There are a couple of other things that I wanted to mention that I don't have slides for. Wells that CRUA uses presently to supply water have a priority date in the 1970s. Some of the wells which are being drilled, well, I think they're going to be drilled now, at least their applications pending, as far as I could tell from the state engineer records that I was able to access. The problem is, even if the water demand is relatively low, as it would be with all this technology, and by the way, the air cooling, the dry cooling using radiator type technology, that requires an enormous amount of energy. Electrical engineers call that parasitic load. And all it means is you have to burn a whole lot more fracked gas from the Permian to generate the power, because it has to supply the dry cooling as well as other things. I also am just appalled that there is not a huge solar component to Project Jupiter. I read that Dubai is spending $6 billion to build a solar facility that will provide 1 gigawatt of power 24/7, 365. It's a whole lot of panels and a whole lot of batteries. But in arid New Mexico, where our water is going away, that's what we should be demanding. Now, the other part of the background here that's just fundamentally important. I'm sure that most people down here are aware of the pending settlement that the United States Supreme Court may approve. This is a settlement to litigation that began in 2013, but the roots go back much farther in time than that. I was dealing with these issues in 1997 as a state employee. But what the settlement provides is, let's see, I don't have any, I thought I had a slide on that. What the settlement provides is that New Mexico is going to have to purchase and retire 18,200 acre feet worth of water rights from willing sellers. Now, that is a one-time fix under the compact. But that's not going to be the end of it, because I don't think that that's going to get the job done with decreasing water supply. The total water supply coming into the Middle Rio Grande this year, to be divided between the Middle Rio Grande and the Lower Rio Grande, was record low. It was less than 400,000 acre feet. It may be slightly over by the time we get to the end of the year, but it's very low. And with those kind of water supplies, and with the kind of groundwater pumping that exists in Doña Ana County, there's no way that the state of New Mexico is going to be able to deliver to Texas legal agreed share as per the settlement without much more curtailments. So rather than facing hydrologic and legal reality, which is we have to dramatically reduce total water use in the Lower Rio Grande, we're now adding demand to that. I think I'll close there. Look forward to your questions, and I'm going to turn this back to Brittany. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your wonderful presentations. The information was great. The story is pretty horrific, though. I'm really saddened to hear about how, this came to be and all of the detriment that it's going to cause to New Mexicans, when we really need to be banding together and finding solutions to move forward into a positive future. We had several questions in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and get started on the ones that were put in the chat. If you have a question and you haven't put it in the chat, please go ahead and do so now, and we'll be sure to make time for everybody's questions. I believe that Representative Ortiz indicated a voice concurrence vote was appropriate because of the Senate amendment only added client compliance to guardrails. You pretty much addressed that. Did you have anything else on that you wanted to say?
No.
Okay.
Rep. Ortiz has shared with me and Rep. Rubio that she was not aware of the actual implications of this Senate floor amendment. And in fact, that's why she asked us to concur with the amendment.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much. Please tell us what legislation we should be watching for in the coming legislative sessions. Is there anything that we can do to stop Project Jupiter? And then kind of tagged on to that, how did a $5 billion deal from the government announced in 2025 balloon into $165 billion IRB?
I'll jump into that, Rubio, and then you.
Okay, yeah.
I didn't
No,
see you.
I was just going to talk about whether or not we can stop the project, but if you want to go ahead with the others, that's
okay.
Go ahead.
I'll just jump in quickly to say I didn't end up at that press conference, but yes, what I have continued to say over the last couple of months, the part that really gets to me, if a deal is so good for our communities, why do you have to make it in the dark? So in the little bits of information that were teased, both from the governor's press announcements and I guess from some materials Borderplex was sharing with some actors that we're not quite sure of, nobody was saying 165 billion. And in fact, they were quite late or quite private on any details related to this project. As I, like Norm, have learned more about the Meta proposal happening in El Paso, everybody knows what's up. They know where the power is coming from, how much power it uses. They know specs about the design of the facility. Like, it's all laid out, and that just didn't happen on Jupiter. But just quickly, I wanted to share like that piece that I didn't circle back to, and we get to talk to you all who care a lot about water, is that the reason that they'd had me running a bill on real-time water technology was because they would need to know a pretty high quality water apparently is needed for projects like this. So if they were to end up using Kura water, they needed to know what was in the water in real time. But county commissioners and others have said to me, oh, no, that's not it. The governor is going to come make us a brackish water treatment center, right? And then lately, once the lobbyists and legislators were out in the open with this in late August, when I asked directly, like, where's the water coming from? Where's the water coming from? Where's the water coming from? Then I hear about a closed loop system. What I take that to be is this either they were still figuring out how they were going to get water, or they were just being dishonest about it based on whatever conversation they were having. I'm not an engineer, not a water engineer like Norm here, but even I know like there's not a closed loop system that exists that at some points in time will not need a refill in water. Like that's how it works. Like water is not finite. But either way, all that being said, at different points in different conversations, the answer on water has been different. And then lastly, I'll just say, Norm, I just saw Norm on Monday, Tuesday, when we were at the Water and Natural Resources Committee in Santa Fe. Since then, it's now been shared with me the paperwork that was submitted, the notice of air quality permit on behalf of Acoma. And the folks that sent this to me, like the totals are clear when you see the greenhouse gas emissions, they actually add up to over 13 million tons. Is a massive amount of emissions. And if you haven't seen those, Norm, I can share them with you now. But in total, they add up to over 13 million tons. That is so many emissions that, as it's been explained to me, that was more greenhouse gases than San Juan, the power plants in Northwest New Mexico that we've since shut down at their full output, like between 2010 and 2015. So clearly, as we've noticed here down south, Project Jupiter comes with lots of typos. What folks that were sharing this with me said, this is so massive, it could be a typo. So I don't know which is worse, that really we're about to try to exist and survive under this massive level of emissions, or that this project is so disorganized that they even had typos on greenhouse emissions for their permitting with the state. But I'll leave it like that now with Rubio. You take it from here.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rep. I mean, even just to speak to the last part that you've just shared around the disorganization, I want to be clear from like an organizing perspective and not as like a legislator, but I know folks have been asking like, can we stop Project Jupiter? I think what's important is that, yeah, the county already voted on it. It's already happened. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that corporations they move really, really fast, and they've already started to move really fast. I know that from conversations that I've had with Micaela and other organizers down near Sunland Park is that things have already started to be built. So things are moving fast, things are quiet, and because they had a head start. And so, no, we're not at like this point where we can like pull the plug. That's gone. And so anyone telling you that we can is lying to you. But what that doesn't mean that communities are powerless, and it's far from it. These projects and that's part of like the not being organized. They move in phases, and every phase depends on the permits, on the water rights, on the infrastructure agreements, even some environmental compliance, land use decisions, and even the state legislature. So every one of those is a point of pressure. And so the real answer is that we may not be able to stop it outright this very second, but we can definitely try to reshape it, slow it down, force transparency, force concessions, force protections, and really do as much as we can to limit the harm. That is still power. And honestly, projects like this don't implode because one community said no. They implode because the water numbers don't add up. Like Micaela was saying, the emissions, the public pressure gets too loud. The lawsuits expose their weaknesses. There's several lawsuits happening right now. The investors panic. As I mentioned in my opening, there's folks who are already panicking, billionaires who made these investments already panicking. The political cover also begins to evaporate. And so I think we're already seeing some of that. We don't know how it'll play out, but I think it's very, very important to understand that community action absolutely changes the cost benefit math for these companies. And so this isn't about hope or hopelessness. It's really about leverage at this point. So the real answer is that it's not too late to change the outcome, but it does require organizing. It requires documentation. It requires pressure on every agency and refusing to let this be normalized. corporations rely on the belief that communities will just move on. And we've seen it happen in other situations, but we can't let that happen. That's their weapon. And then add that it's what people need to hear, that stopping might look different than you imagine, but doing nothing guarantees the worst version of this project. And so community action guarantees something different. Maybe it's smaller, maybe it's constrained, maybe it's halted, maybe it's reshaped, but the future isn't locked in. And I think that's the biggest message that I want to say right now, and that we have, as a state, have changed the trajectory of other mega projects before. Like I feel like we can do that here. And I really just encourage you all to, like, organizing is so important, and I need you all to know that this is going to require a lot of work. And so if you're really committed to putting to slowing this whole process down, I really need for folks to really commit to this organizing piece, because that's the critical piece here.
And just to answer that piece about the legislature, this January we're going into a 30-day session. Constitutionally, we alternate between longer sessions and shorter sessions. This is a shorter session, so what that means is legislation that we procedurally are allowed to introduce has to have a fiscal impact. So it's either related to how we create and craft and spend our New Mexico budget, or how we shift revenue collection. So as such, believe me, if it was a long session, I know Rep. Rubin and I would be down to repeal the microgrid amendment, to repeal that floor amendment wholesale. But that is not the kind of session we're having. And frankly, there's some powerful people that got this moved, and including Governor Lujan Grisham. That being said, I have heard from colleagues. I know in the House we have Chair Chandler that wants to introduce a bill that tries to minimize the harm of the presence of AI in our daily lives, especially when it's being used to make decisions of consequence. So some of the things she's considering: making sure we know when AI is being used. If AI is being used in a decision-making process, especially like in state government, that we have a right to appeal that with a human and correct the accuracy of the information that the AI system was using. So not directly about data centers or AI campuses, or what it means to entertain the idea of these facilities in our state, but the impact of AI in our lives. So that's legislation that I know I'm watching closer than ever. And then, yeah, otherwise it's not a big policy session, but I know for Rep. Rubio and I, it's always rung true. If you follow the money, you see who has power and who doesn't. So there are ways that we're going to have to watch closely about how some of these priorities show up in the governor's budget, or with Chair Small at the helm.
Excellent. Thank you both for your wonderful answers. And I really just want to reiterate the organize message, right? That's why we're here. We are all passionate about New Mexico and protecting our future for, many generations to come, and keeping the air clean and the water clean, and enough water for all of us to have going forward. There's so many little things that we can do, and we'll get to some of those things in our closing slides. So please stick around for the end of our presentation. But
Brittany, can I add one piece that I meant to on this answer?
Yes, please do.
Part of the ugly cloud hanging over us, many of you probably all read, Washington Post was reporting yesterday, Trump has said that he intends to ban states from regulating AI in any way. So whether it's like on the data center, like hyperscalers, like facility side, or what like Chair Chandler's going to tend to pick up. So you all may remember in the huge, terrible bill of the summer, at one point there was a provision trying to do this, and then in a bipartisan way, the Senate said it wasn't appropriate. Trump came out publicly a day or two ago and said he intends to make that real. It's wildly unconstitutional. It's an overreach of the feds into state rights. But so we're going to do our thing here. And a lot of states across the West have been addressing both those fronts, like really limiting the kind of exploitation that these facilities can wreak in our communities, and trying to better understand the impact in our daily lives. But just like hot off their presses, Trump is trying to ban states from regulating AI in any way.
Yeah, thank you so much for that addendum. I think that's really important to keep in mind the the larger perspective that, that's not just here, we kind of have a bigger fight also to fight. Um, Back to some of our questions. I think, Norm, this one is for you. On your slide of basin-wide emissions comparison, what is the geographic boundary of the Paseo del Norte Basin that you included? Does it include Ciudad Juarez?
It does include Ciudad Juarez.
Okay, thank you. Do you have predicted levels of particulates from Jupiter microgrid which contribute to respiratory ailments?
Um, no, I don't have particulate estimates, or, we really don't have any data from the source, except what may have just come out with regard to what they're doing. And that's one of the things I really wanted to emphasize. This project is secret. The details of it are secret. The impact is secret. And they're going to try to get away with keeping it secret, apparently.
Thank you. Did you calculate indirect water usage for Jupiter, the water that would be used by the gas-powered steam turbines?
Well, my understanding, no, I didn't. I calculated. I didn't calculate water use. I used what Project Jupiter said they're going to use, which is not a whole lot of water. And it's, something that would fit. But again, it's an extra demand on groundwater at a time when the Mexico is under the gun to reduce that. And this groundwater demand would be supplied by wells that have 1970 priority dates. Elephant Butte Irrigation District's water right is 1903.
Will you clarify what that means, Norm? So all of us, or I can start, like for those of us that have Elephant Butte Irrigation District water rights, so irrigators, farmers, people that have surface and groundwater rights, in this part of New Mexico, we have like a right that stacks on top of each other. So if there's not enough water in the river to send to our ditches for us to irrigate, then we can use our pumps and our wells to pull groundwater up and irrigate to that same distribution that we have a legal right to if we've been adjudicated or not. But basically what he's saying is those CRUA rights and wells, they're baby tiny water rights. Like they basically just came to be. And there are many of us that have water rights that go back much further. So when we're in a drought or a time of less water, like they're farther away from water as a real resource.
Right, and the rights were originally developed by putting in groundwater wells for a big Santa Teresa development. And those rights right now are parked in a couple of circles of irrigation that are growing sod. I found out today from the state engineer office that no emergency lease is needed to use that water for construction because those rights are already in the right place for Project Jupiter. So as Representative Rubio said, they are off and running.
I'm curious about that statement because, construction use is not typically included with irrigation right, or is it a commercial right or an industrial right that they have permit to?
I think it's a commercial right, as I understand it. I'm just really starting my detailed look into this.
I would be curious how the state engineer deems construction use to fall within commercial type of use, and why there wouldn't need to be a change in type of use to use it for construction purposes.
Well, we'll ask that question to the Office of the State Engineer.
Indeed, we should. Okay. Do we know which companies will be providing the natural gas to Project Jupiter? Are these companies part of the secret negotiations that got Jupiter off the ground? There's got to be someone benefiting from this deal.
Well, the only thing I've read about the natural gas source is in the Midland Reporter and in another industry group that collects data and makes it available to throughout the oil and gas industry. And they say it's going to be Permian natural gas, and there's statements that there is going to have to be a new pipeline. I don't know the facts. Again, everything's so secret that how do you know what's real? But I think reading the Midland Reporter, obviously, there have been discussions between Project Jupiter proponents and the oil people in southeast New Mexico and across the line of the Permian Basin to bring their fracked gas here.
And I have asked lots of questions of mostly my Republican colleagues that have a pretty deep expertise in oil and gas and have shared with me some of what they sense is possible on this project. But I've poked around, whispered around, nobody knows who's going to be providing this gas. Important in the floor amendment on the Senate was the ways it was establishing the room that microgrids had get to act outside of the other timelines that came with the really massive Energy Transition Act we passed several years ago. Is like they get a different timeline, but really only have to follow the ETA rules if they intend to produce so much power that they end up selling it back to El Paso Electric, which is possible. Like the power estimates needed for this project are larger than the entire El Paso Electric service area. Like, so for those listening from afar, like this utility serves West Texas and South Central New Mexico. Project Jupiter needs more power than that entire service area combined, and of course is going to produce more emissions than that service area combined. But what the Republicans are telling me, because they're mad, right? We came for their ways of doing energy. We said everybody has to move to a transition, and then somehow we opened up a new possibility to do lots of emissions out in our way here in our backyard. And what they've said is that there's no way today, cost feasible way to get natural gas to net zero or zero carbon emissions. How, and this is so important to me, I'm glad I was reminded of this, how this becomes legally possible is something called offsets that we have in the Energy Transition Act. And you all may have heard of offsets because it's part of Tesla's operating budget, right? Before Trump came down on EVs, other automakers were like buying offsets from Tesla. So they were still emitting carbon at the same levels, but they were paying for someone else's lower emissions to meet their standards. So our communities down here, down home, are going to be living, navigating, doing our best in our resilient ways to exist in a future with this dump of emissions on us. So they might get to net zero on paper legally by paying someone else off for their carbon emissions, but us here, we still have the emissions no matter what. So that, to me, when I call this a dirty deal, it's dirty because of the political process, it's dirty because of the emissions, and it's dirty because eventually they might meet the requirements of the ETA by paying someone else for their offsets, while all of that is out here where we call home.
And if I could just add, it makes me really sad that there was a planned and deliberate attempt to circumvent the Energy Transition Act.
Mm-hmm. And someone here in the chat said something about the NDAs. We forgot to mention that. I don't even know how this is legal or possible. Apparently, a bunch of our county commissioners signed NDAs with these entities in the lead up to this process. So nobody on the county commission thought it was appropriate to tell us that live here, exist here, have our families and futures here, what they were up to, because they were signing NDAs with the corporate entities. I've been wondering if some of the legislators did too, but we haven't gone that far in our investigations. I think everyone but somebody asked which county commissioners. It's my sense that everyone besides Commissioner Susana Chaparro signed NDAs.
They've even signed NDAs with NMSU faculty.
Yeah.
And does IPRA come? Does an IPRA get behind an NDA?
I don't know.
It's a good question.
Something to research.
Representative Rubio, did you have something to say?
No, I was just saying that's a good question. I definitely think that's something we should look into.
Yeah. Do we have any legal researchers in our audience tonight? Does anyone want to volunteer to do some research on IPRAs and NDAs? If so, please let us know. We would definitely love the help with that. Norm, can you talk about the feasibility and time frame for the proposed desalination plant that is also being discussed?
Well, that's a super important point, and I'm glad it came up in a question. I know a little bit about the research that's going in to define, that's being done right now to define New Mexico's brackish water aquifers. And the brackish water aquifers in the Lower Rio Grande, adjacent to the Lower Rio Grande, are receiving a lot of attention. And it's my professional estimate, and I've heard this from other people that are much closer to the ground on this that know, is they figured out how to treat the brackish water that would be treated in Sunland Park or wherever for a brackish water treatment plant, but they don't know where they're going to get the brackish water in a way that wouldn't undermine the Lower Rio Grande, which is over appropriated. And they're at the very infants, and they don't know where they're going to get rid of the concentrated waste. From cleaning up the water, you have a waste stream that has all those contaminants in it, and that has to be disposed in a way that it'll be out of the human environment for forever, because it's really bad stuff. So I think a brackish water treatment plant at the earliest is 5 years away.
Thank you. Are developers starting to get spooked because the governor's produced water bill got shot down?
Rubio, you were in on this.
I mean, I wasn't in it like directly, but I mean, I think just the rulemaking in itself was I think that was the beginning of what I've been using is the term betrayal. Like, I think we were betrayed with Project Jupiter from in a number of layers that we've sort of shared tonight. But I think many people also felt betrayed with the rulemaking as well when it came to this issue or to that issue. And so I think a lot of us should be proud of the decision that was made, because there's a lot of people who not only spent years and years trying to ensure that this was the direction that we're going through, that we would go to, but the fact that at the very last minute, to see some of the main players that were involved in the Project Jupiter also being involved in trying to orchestrate sort of this, like, I don't want to say I guess takeover of an entire process that people were trying to do in good faith. I think that is, I want to say, I guess I'm just proud of the community that came out so forcefully on the rulemaking, that we did get, like, justice was served, in my opinion. And so my hope is that, and this is part of the organizing piece that I was sharing earlier, is that there's just going to be pressure points that we're just going to have to keep, we're going to have to be checking in on all the time as this project moves forward, because if the developers are getting spooked, then that's good, because that's going to, it's moments like this that we need to really we need to honor and we need to celebrate, because our communities need to see these small wins. And I feel like it is a small win if they are if they're reluctant now to move forward with this project. So I think that's something that we need to keep moving forward on, and ensure that that if there's ways that we can disrupt this whole process, we need to be able to do that.
Brittany, do I have time to weigh in before you wrap us up?
Yeah, please go for it.
Just to quickly say, Ruby, I don't even think this was a small win. I think this was a massive, surprising, like, stunning political twist. Just at a high level, for those of you all joining this conversation more recently, the Produced Water Act was passed in 2018. We were both in the legislature. We took different votes on that. And I think we still engage with this conversation differently, but respectfully. For me, living down here and having a little bit, a tiny bit of water rights, like, I imagine that in my future, certainly my children's future, we're just going to have different conversations about what it means to exist here with a rapidly depleting water source. I said then, and I say now, we always have to follow the science. What happened this summer, that there's, right, fallout to come, is that years, it took those scientists, those voting members of the Water Quality Control Commission, years to put out their produced water rules. And what they're contemplating is that we already give permissions to oil and gas industry to treat and reuse that water in industry, which is really important. Only after was I elected did I learn that for fracking, for every barrel you extract, you have to use 5 or 6 barrels of water. So when we got into this, that was 5 or 6 barrels of fresh water for every barrel of oil that we extracted. This Produced Water Act, among other things, gave more room and provisions for industry to reuse their own water. What was being contemplated and considered now is if we're at the moment and have enough science, data, information in front of us to potentially treat produced water to other beneficial uses. What the commission seemed to say in May was we're not there yet. After that, these commissioners that are longstanding experts and people in the field were replaced by political agents like cabinet secretaries themselves with lots of behind the scene emails about like how they needed to get it over the line. After this presentation that we had in Artesia about the updates on the produced water, someone that had been presenting for the agency for MNERD followed me into the hall and wanted me to know that those the original members were only replaced for their well-being. That now that there was so much attention and this was such a high-profile issue, they didn't want them to feel threatened or they didn't want them to feel under the light. So that these on the direction of the governor, these secretaries only went themselves to start a new vote to consider a new petition for the well-being of the original voting members, right? Like lying to my face. We saw the emails, we saw the IPRA, what came out with IPRA, like that's not why they were replaced. So what happened since then, they all went back. The vote they took in July to consider a new petition. I just got to say this very quickly. The legislator and lobbyist superstar team behind this are one and the same, Chair Small and Jennifer Bradfew. They ran and introduced the original Produced Water Act. They ran the game for Project Jupiter, and this summer they were asking legislators, myself included, to support them in going back to a new position for produced water rules. So like these are the same players in the same conversation. They won on Project Jupiter so far, but together, like because of the outpouring of experts and New Mexicans and leaders of so many kinds from so many communities who showed up last week, was it, Norm? For hours and hours of public comment, that board got scared and they vacated their vote from July. That's an incredible, incredible, incredible win. I'd say these issues are interconnected, and we got to keep showing up, organizing with strategy and approach and heart.
Representative, I think you're wrong, to be honest.
That's Vanessa Alarid, the Borderplex lobbyist, I think, that just came off mute to say I was wrong, but that's all right. It was a celebration. We're celebrating. High five, Rubio, and everybody out there that pushed this through.
I was at that hearing.
Oh, I think we lost your sound there for a second.
I was done talking. Here goes Norm.
I actually think it's probably time to wrap.
It is. Thank you, Norm. Thank you so much, Representative Cadena and Representative Rubio, for your time tonight, for all of your efforts in working to protect New Mexico. I agree. This is a terrible betrayal of you and of New Mexicans. The way this was put through is really sad and disappointing. And what we can do together is to work to fight the remainder, right? We can read the facts, we can share the facts, we can talk about water, we can talk about air quality with the people that we love. We have a great opportunity with the holidays coming up to chat with people maybe we don't see so often and educate them about the issues that are happening in New Mexico that they may not be aware of. I am going to post in the chat, if I can find all of my windows here, a call to action that we have on our website that gives you a lot of really specific steps that you can take to contact your legislators about this. We're going to be working really hard in November to put together our legislative program, and so we want you to stay in touch with us about that. And that brings us to our schedule. We don't ever have a speaker series in December because we want you to spend time with your families, bringing them the information that you've learned here throughout the last year on our Third Thursday speaker series. And then this year we're going to be taking January off because, again, we feel like there's a lot of really important information in the legislature and we really want to focus on that. But what I do want to say is you are subscribed to our newsletter now for
Okay. Hold on,
sorry.
I gotta get off of this. Okay, was that
Sorry, we seem to have some muting issues coming on. So please pay attention to your email, and we will be sending out newsletters in December and January about all of the things that we are working on as water advocates and how you can participate, how you can do your part, what you can help us with. You are the backbone of how we get things done. We are so appreciative of your time and your effort, and thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to our co-sponsors for this presentation, the New Mexico Water Dialogue, Amigos Bravos, 350 New Mexico, Interfaith Power and Light, the League of Women and the League of Women Voters. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you for getting the word out about our presentations. If you enjoyed this presentation and you have the ability, we are an all-volunteer organization and we do everything based on donations. I'm going to pop a little link to PayPal in the chat. If you can spare $1 or $2, we would love that. If you are interested in volunteering with us, we have some board positionings open up, as well as lots of other volunteer opportunities. If you'd like to help us work on our newsletter or our legislative outreach, please get in touch. We would love to have you as part of our team. Again, thank you so much for attending tonight. Thank you, representatives. We really appreciate your presentations.
Thank you all.